How many times have we put this off? Twice.
Twice, I think. Yeah, because I was sick once. I was sick twice.
Yeah, no, that's right. Wow, the pregnancy life, eh?
Pregnancy life, it's been crazy. I've been so sick. Yeah. And then I wasn't sure, when I was sick a few weeks ago, I was like, do I have COVID or am I just have a migraine or, yeah.
So in the end, it wasn't that, was it?
No, I've tested negative. Like every time I've taken a test, I've tested negative. So even the last week when my partner's been at home sick with COVID, I've tested negative the whole way through, so.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, you know, maybe like you've got that mutated gene in you we've discovered the cure.
I mean, I tend to get sick, like my immune system's pretty crap, so I'm like, this is amazing. Maybe being pregnant is like a superpower. But
it could be that, you know, that they talk about, you know, your body adjusting to certain stresses, so who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Tell us about what you do. Like, tell us who you are, because I know you kind of, you know, you operate in a field of psychology, right? So give us a bit of of how you would describe yourself.
So I would describe myself as a holistic wellbeing professional. I'm currently studying my master's in psychotherapy, and I have studied my undergrads in psychology, and I've done all sorts of kind of trainings around mental health, mindfulness, NLP, multiple brain integration, so like your head, your heart and your gut, all sorts of things, and worked in mental health, worked in drug and alcohol addiction. Currently am working as a coach, but I hate that word because it doesn't really sum up how I practice. I feel like people have this kind of preconception of a coach as either, you know, like a financial coach or like a spiritual, one of those airy
like
fairy.
Tony Robbins kind
of. Yeah. And I'm definitely more kind of take into consideration the whole being. So someone's history, their mental, their physical, their spiritual, their social, their familial history, everything, and work in much more kind of therapeutic way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when people come to you, right? What's the most common thing people come to you with?
Oh gosh, anxiety, depression. Yeah. There's a lot of people feeling stuck, and a lot of people feeling stuck in kind of not good enough patterns. So there's a lot of self-confidence and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine the pandemic will have a lot to do with that as well. I mean, you know, we've kind of all gone through it in one way or another. You know, you just don't, when you don't know what tomorrow holds for you, and you know, you still want to progress, you want to do something with life, but you're like, well, first of all, what am I gonna do? And if I can do it, what, you know, is there much point to it? Because, you know, like, apocalypse is coming.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I can totally get that. How long have you been in the field?
I mean, my whole life, really. So my mum's a psychotherapist, my dad was a psychiatrist, so I've kind of grown up in that circle and grown up with that way of talking and around, you know, people at parties and things that are all psychologists, psychotherapists, that sort of thing. I started my undergrad when I was 18, so straight out of high school. So, oh God, I'm now nearly 34. So quite a long time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so yeah, I mean, like, if it covers that kind of time span, I suppose the next question I'd want to ask is, have you seen much change with what you've seen in that landscape? Has people's, I don't know, I mean, I suppose, has people's problems changed much, or is it still the same stuff, or how do you see it? I
think the problems aren't necessarily changing. I think that maybe now people are starting to talk about them more. I personally feel like with social media and kind of this hyper-intensive state that we live in, people are much more aware of stress and anxiety in their lives, and there's a lot bombarding them all the time. There also seems to be a little bit more of a tendency to pathologize really normal human experience now. You know, for instance, it's completely normal to feel sad for a couple of weeks when something goes wrong. It's so normal. But then people kind of jump to, I'm depressed and try and get
self-diagnosing.
Yeah. And actually it's really normal, and I think it's really important that people know that it's really normal. And grief and things like that are really normal processes that aren't necessarily over in a couple of weeks, a couple of months. And I do think with COVID and things, this kind of general sense of the unknown, about not kind of knowing what's going to happen, whether the country is in lockdown or isolation, or, you know, what's going to happen with jobs or financial stability, all that sort of stuff. There are a lot of people who haven't necessarily presented in the past for help that are seeking help now.
Okay. See, I also, like, from my personal experience, I feel like these, you know, these mental, I mean, I don't even, like, I don't want to categorize them as like illnesses or disorders or anything like that, but just any sort of issues that you could address have somewhat become this quirky personality trait for some people. You know, it's kind of like, oh, well, you know, I have anxiety, I have this and I have that. It's kind of like these little things you drop in about yourself that makes you special. And yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. You know, there's a lot of good things that make people special, but I think with things like that, kind of trying to make them into these almost marketable features of yourself, I don't know how I feel about that. What do you think?
I think there's two sides to that for me. I feel like there is a normalization that happens when we talk about it more. But I do also think that, you know, there has been a little bit of a glorification of pathologies. You know, I hate that word too, pathologies. But yeah, I mean, even things like school kids kind of coming and saying, oh, we've got an eating disorder, when, yeah, they ate an entire packet of biscuits. Well, I can eat an entire packet of biscuits, you know, but to actually have an eating disorder is a totally different thing. And I think I struggle with this one a little bit, because there is, for me, an element of when you have experienced severe depression or anxiety or, you know, unwellness in any way, it is a really big struggle. And to have somebody kind of say, oh, you know, I'm depressed, and maybe not fully understand the depth of what that is, can kind of feel like a little bit of a affront to you. Yeah, so it's difficult for me, because I feel like it's really important that we do normalize and we do talk about these things. And yes, people can say, oh, I'm feeling depressed at the moment, but it's not necessarily that I have depression, or, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the same thing, you know.
No.
Like, there are people that are just, you know, like clinically depressed, I suppose, and then there's just negative events in your life that, you know, like such depression would be a natural response. You know, in fact, it would be like, it'd probably be more questionable as if you didn't, you know, if you're fully kind of numbing yourself to the point where you don't react. It's like, well, okay, what's going on there?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, yeah, so like that's, in that sense, I do feel like it's kind of been somewhat I don't know, to me it seems a little bit trivialized because of this, you know, because on one hand, like, it dilutes the issue for people that are legitimately suffering from something, and, you know, they need that help, and they, you know, they actually need to deal with it somehow. And then you got people that are just kind of like, for lack of a better word, just, I don't know, maybe want some attention for this. You see quite a bit of that over social media, where, you know, somebody all of a sudden comes out and it's just, oh, well, I've got this and I've got this and that. And yeah, like I feel like I see that in a number of areas, not even just mental health, but just in general trauma, you know, stuff that happens to people that gets diluted by such things. You know, like, you have people that are legit victims of something, and then someone comes along and says, well, you know, me too, but are you really? Is it the same thing? And, you know, like, you hear that straight away, me too, like, well, are you? Yeah, and
I think, you know, from a professional perspective, the question will be, well, what's in that for you? What is the need that's filling in you, that you actually have to come out and kind of put that out there? But yeah, absolutely, it definitely kind of dilutes the power, I guess, behind what some people really go through and experience, particularly with trauma and serious depression and those sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the whole social media aspect, I feel like it has contributed to that a lot as well, because people have literally become famous over these things, right?
Yeah.
So I've found that a little bit weird. I don't know how I feel about that, because I don't want to be that guy that comes around and says, oh, well, what you're feeling is not valid in any way, because it may well be, but it's got to the point where it's actually hard to figure out what's legit and what isn't anymore.
Yeah, what's genuine. And sometimes I know it feels a little bit gratuitous in a way. I think that there is a real power in vulnerability and a power in sharing your story and sharing it from a healed place. Whereas there's a difference if you're kind of still going through it and sharing it and kind of reliving it and getting into the drama of it with people. But if you share it from a really empowered, healed space, it can be quite powerful. But there is also quite a gratuitous element out there at the moment of, like you say, oversharing and what's where are the lines of what's real, why are you doing this, what's the motive behind it, and how are you hoping to serve other people with this experience, or
whether you're looking to serve yourself more than anything.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting you say that, because we all know those people that kind of constantly have some sort of problems. It's just always something always went down. It'll be the relationship, then it'll be the family, then it'll be something else, and it's just like, how does this keep piling up on you? Like, how it's it's just like that in itself to me sounds like this like pathological negativity that's always surrounding you. And that to me is a bit of a puzzling issue, because again, you can probably tell I'm a little bit conflicted about that, because I'm not I don't want to devalue anyone's experience and to say, well, no, it's not valid, you're just full of shit, attention seeking. But at the same time, you can't help but still have that thought at the back of your mind. So, what's your experience around that? Have you come across much of the two different kind of types to be able to tell them apart, what's legit and what's just kind of fishing?
I mean, I think that comes with a little bit of personal discernment, and also taking social media for what it is. It's a social media snippet of somebody's what they've chosen to post. So if I see something and I read it and I'm like, oh, quite often that's what it does to me. I just keep scrolling. I'm like, I can't deal with that right now, But if I see something that feels like, oh wow, this person is really sharing and it's touched something in me, and it could be because they're saying, they're talking about their healing journey with depression or anxiety or something, and that feels like, wow, that's really empowering. I quite like that. I used to share quite a lot. So I have an underlying health condition, and I used to share quite a lot about my journey, mainly because it felt like there wasn't a lot of understanding about invisible illness. And also there was a lot of people out there who were going through the same thing as I did, who didn't have that voice. And it felt like a really sharing, connecting thing to do. And it kind of created, there was, people all around the world who had this same thing that I did, who were able to talk and to share their experiences. And that felt at the time like a really good thing to do. And also in a hopeful kind of way, sharing about, there is hope, there is things that you can do. And whereas I can get triggered sometimes, I hate that word, but I can get triggered sometimes when I see people who share in it feels like a really needy kind of way. And I think, again, that comes back to just being discerning around what we look at. And if it irks you, just disengage, because there's not really much we can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when it comes to things like that, most of the time we just kind of see it as like, okay. But yeah, no, I know what you mean, because there are certain aspects of it where you share and you kind of feel that you're not doing it so that people feel sorry for you. You do it more so that because you realize there could be other people out there like you and they haven't shared that. And I've actually, that probably has happened to me in the past as well, where I've shared something and all of a sudden I got a couple of the boys that I actually know. I know them, but I don't know that part of them.
Yeah.
And they kind of come out and say, yo, you know what? Like, I've gone through that too. I felt that too. I never knew about it, but it was cool for us to just kind of bounce back and forth. And it's just like, man, I feel you. Like it established some like good understanding and connections. Like the next time I saw them in person, I was like, my man, like I feel you. I understand you a bit better now. Like it kind of brings you a bit closer to people,
Yeah. And then at the same time, what you're saying is there are those people that are posting in that quite gratuitous seeking kind of way, and it's kind of that seeking validation through likes, and it's that kind of same old quote for me: 1 million likes will never be enough if you don't like yourself. You can't get that validation through sharing that trauma or that wound or whatever, because it's never going to heal it for you. It's never going to fill you up.
Yeah, no. So I mean, like I find that confusing, that area of social media, especially when it comes to the whole mental health space, because I feel like there's there are many different ways to approach that, especially on social media. There are people that genuinely try to kind of create. I mean, it's getting to the point where I can't even say that without cringing a little bit, but, create awareness, because everyone's always creating awareness. Like, what the fuck does it mean? Like, we're all aware at this point that everybody's got a mental health, like we've come out of this, dark age where we didn't think that it was a real thing. We kind of realize that now, but now that we do, what the fuck are we doing about it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so, are we actually treating each other better for that now that we realize that we actually feel stuff? Yeah.
I think that's the nail on the head right there. What are we actually doing about it? So if you're posting about this stuff, if you are actively seeking engagement and things, well, what are you actually doing about it? Are you seeking treatment? Are you seeking healing? Are you putting the work in, as well as just sharing online? And also, are you aware of what it might do to other people when you share, or the effects that it might have on other people when you share? I think it's really, obviously we cannot be responsible for other people's responses to us, but if you're sharing material around mental wellness, mental health, all those sorts of things, it's really important to be aware that what you share might have a really strong response in somebody. So what are you doing? Like, what are you doing about it? Are you just sharing, or are you actually putting in the steps to help yourself and heal?
Because I can see, I can see a positive side of it, such as, maybe addressing certain behaviors that, maybe kind of that are normalized in society that we're all like just don't pay attention to. But I actually, have a major effect on some people. And, when you talk about it, it's kind of like, hey, some of the shit you do, it actually, sucks for someone. Maybe cut that shit out. And, in that sense, people think about it and say, hey, you know what, maybe that's the case. Maybe I'll stop that. And you've created a bit of positive difference in the world. But otherwise, if you're kind of just talking about it and bringing attention to it, but you're not really doing anything else, then, well, again, we're kind of just doing burnouts in the middle of a field.
Yeah. What is the purpose here? And how are you, in bringing awareness to it, what are the next steps? How are you, is your goal to support other people? Is your goal to share it to empower, or to encourage, or to spread hope? Or, what are you doing about it? Yeah.
Have you found much difference, because in my previous episode I had Zane from For All the Brothers. So, we talked a lot about men's mental health, and, how that in itself is kind of a new field in a sense. Do you see much difference between, say, men's and women's mental health, in the way it's approached, in the way of, what kind of problems people have? Is there much difference, or is this?
I think it's really individual, because it comes down to, core beliefs, core woundings, what the trauma history might be, what the life history is. There definitely is now, or are now, more men presenting for therapy and things like that, which is amazing, and more men willingly sharing and speaking up about that and around that space. In terms of a difference between the sexes around what they present with, I think yes and no, because men have kind of traditionally experienced these things a bit differently, and they've had possibly more of a veil of silence than women have in some ways around some topics. The way that they present then is different, and what they present with is different. Whereas women might come in and more easily talk about sexual trauma, or be able to talk more about body image issues. It might kind of be a roundabout thing for a male. But a lot of it really comes down to, kind of core wounding that people have had, often carrying since childhood, unless they've had traumatic experiences along the way as well. They definitely present differently, but with the same kind of issues, really.
So do you feel like the ideal way to deal with them and the ideal outcome would be in that way quite similar for both?
Personally, I take a really individualized approach with people. Not one therapy is going to work for every single person. You know, it's like put on the same pair of pants. It's not going to look good on everybody as much as we want them to. Some men really benefit from physical exercise and men's group that do like physical activities together. Culturally too, if there's a cultural element, often for Māori men, it's getting back to the whenua and getting back connected to their cultural roots. And some women benefit from that too. I personally, the physical aspect is really important for me. Like I process somatically through my body, so that's a really important thing for me. So I think treatment-wise, it's kind of being able to sit with the person in front of you and meet them as they are, and being able to utilize different approaches. Yeah.
No, I feel that. I can see that. Obviously, you try not to establish patterns in what you do, which I can definitely respect that. It's it sounds like a very professional approach. I think you are right in terms of, especially it's interesting you brought up culture, because I think especially in a country like New Zealand, where we have a whole lot of different cultures, kind of like it's one big melting pot. And I have seen people benefit from certain aspects of it, like you said. Some of my Māori and Pacific Islander boys, when they kind of get a bit more reconnected with their culture, they develop certain values and carry themselves a little bit differently and handle these things differently. I myself kind of have a somewhat conflicting approach when it comes to that, because I don't know, there's this perception that Russians are pretty hardcore people, and I myself have always kind of lived that way too. I'm just kind of like, I've always subscribed to that whole image of like, I'm all right because I'm supposed to be all right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be sweet. Like I'm hard as a brick. You ain't gonna break me. But the more you do it, the more you realize that like it still weighs you down. Like like that brick starts chipping away, and unless you actually address these things, you can really dig yourself into a bit of a hole.
Oh, absolutely. And that kind of way of being is kind of almost like a cultural kind of coping mechanism that's been passed down intergenerationally, like in some families it might be a little bit more of a dissociation pattern, or but that kind of get it done, I'm okay, keep going, productive, like it's a real, it gets passed on, and particularly with men, or you see a lot of perfectionism and things in women, a lot of obsession over the appearance and things like that.
Have you done much work around personality types? That's like my favorite thing. I like the whole personality thing, especially the whole like what is it? Is it the 16 personalities?
Yeah. Yes. So I'm a little bit different in that I am of the opinion that we are kind of multiplicitous. So I feel that we can be all things at different times. So some people might take that test on a Monday after their morning coffee, come out as one thing. 3 weeks later, something's gone on in their life, they might take the test and come out as something else. I personally don't feel like we're fixed. I feel like we're ever evolving and ever changing, and we have the capacity to be and to express in all ways. Whereas I have some people, I know some friends that are like, stick to it dogmatically, you know? Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of one of those people because I've done that test like a million times. Like,
Yeah.
And because I was actually interested, because the first time I've done it, I was like, man, this really speaks to me.
Yeah. So
I'm not like, I'm not the kind of person to, I take these things with a grain of salt, of course. I'm not going to be like, now that it's told me this, I am that. I'm like, well, you don't tell me what the fuck I am. I decide that. But every time I've done that, I'm like, okay, it still seems to be coming back as the same thing. And yeah, and it kind of cleared up a lot of behavioral patterns for me. I mean, it didn't necessarily fix them. I don't know if they need to be fixed or not to begin with, but it kind of it gave it a bit of logic.
Yeah. It helped it make sense to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, if that's the case, then that's awesome. If it makes sense to you, if it fits for you, if it helps you go about your life or kind of process who you are or how you process things, if it teaches you, that's awesome. It's like anything. It's a tool, and it's how you use the tool and how you interpret the tool that's important.
I think the issue that it created for me is a kind of it put me in the place where I realized that there's not really much way I can change certain things about myself. Yeah, and that's what I mean. It's just like it's quite a confronting thing. It's not a thing that I'm just kind of like, oh, this is it, this is happening to me. But I'm like, I can understand why I am the way I am. Like, do you know the different types?
Yeah, I haven't gone into them in depth in a while. Are you talking about like the INFJs and things?
And all that. Yeah. So like apparently, my one is I think it is an INTJ. It's called an architect. Mm-hmm. Apparently, it's meant to be the rarest type. There's only like 3% of people with that type. Now the issue around that is you can delve really deep into things. You can kind of really see the logic in anything. Like, I think this is probably why I enjoy having debates, because I don't get emotional about them. I actually enjoy kind of exploring different ideas. But in saying that, you analyze everything to such a degree that nothing surprises you anymore. You see every side of everything. You kind of deconstruct the room that you sit in to that point, and you're just kind of like, sometimes you don't know how to kind of get certain emotion back into your life, certain surprise and excitement of things, because it's just like you already know what's going to happen before it happens, kind of thing. Yeah. What are your thoughts around that?
So I personally believe that we're all able to change. I personally believe that if I thought that I was going to be this way forever, the way that I am now, and I'm pretty comfortable with myself, but I definitely have growth areas. I feel like we're all able to change, and I think it would be doing some sort of work and exploration around different things with you, and it probably would surprise you what the things would come out to be. And challenging those ideas, particularly with feeling the emotions and things, because I'm going to hasten to guess that is, like you say, a really cultural thing for you, and so there probably are some blocks there that have been passed on, and I think you can work on those things if you want to. You know, you don't have to. It's the options there.
It's not so much that I kind of block them, but it's in the sense, you know, like that. I think from my perspective is, you know, once you've seen something, you can't unsee it. And to me personally, I think to try to even create this element of surprise to myself, I'd feel like I'd be fooling myself. I feel like I'd be doing a disservice for myself if I was to try a different way. Like this may sound like it's kind of like a way that is somewhat like, well, you know, it's not that much fun if you always know what's going to happen. If you're kind of nothing ever surprises you, you know, you must not be a very happy person. But I'm like, that's not the case, you know. Like I still find things that I enjoy, and I do them, and I aim to be more involved in that. But in saying that, yeah, like I can't see myself readjusting that area of that.
Yeah.
Is that like, you know, is that something you still think that you can kind of get around? Yeah.
Personally, yes. But if you don't want to and you don't feel the need to, why would you? Do you see what I mean? Like if somebody was saying this is a problem for me, absolutely, come, we'll work on it. EMDR is a really powerful new therapy. Well, not that new, but really powerful therapy that has some amazing research behind it. That's proving really useful for people who are feeling quite stuck in one way of being, or who have like really serious trauma and things. But if it works for you, if you're happy, if you're living your life, if you don't have a problem, you know, if it ain't fixed, don't. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I feel you there. And at the end of the day, yeah, I don't feel like it's a problem. I just feel like this is, it's what it is. It is what it is, and you live with it. You learn to navigate it. One thing I found, like, have you got an opinion around like the whole, you know, because I have heard of psychedelics being used in therapy. I realized that, you know, because of the legal nature of them, it's kind of a gray area that, you know, like, well, what are your thoughts on that?
I haven't done enough research into it myself to kind of know the pros and cons in a really cohesive way. I personally feel like, so EMDR that I just mentioned is a therapeutic process which is used to reprogram memories. And there are a lot of people out there who, through trauma, through familial patterns of being, through whatever, through coping mechanisms that they used when they were really young, cannot access those parts of themselves. So yes, psychedelics might be a way to do that. I haven't looked into it enough myself, but from what I've heard, there are people in New Zealand looking into it. I think there's a practice actually in Ponsonby that are using not experimenting, but using microdosing and things, and just about kind of almost removing. So our brains kind of have these protective mechanisms. And they're always there to serve us. It's not like they're doing it out of badness. But, you know, dissociation, things like that, they happen because they're trying to protect us. But what happens once you become a bit dissociated to something like that, to a feeling, to an experience, to a memory? If you can't access it, you can't heal it. And talk therapy often can be re-traumatizing for some people, or it just goes on and on and on and on for years because you're still not accessing that core memory, that core feeling. So EMDR is a way to process through that and reprogram that. And I from what I know, I think psychedelics are a way to do that as well. They just kind of remove that block and open up the mind a little bit.
Do you know what it stands for, EMDR?
It's eye movement desensitization, rapid eye movement. So it's kind of like, it's bilateral stimulation. So a therapist will use either tapping on your knees or tracking of your eye movements. Sometimes you hold things in your hands that kind of stimulate you. And it's just getting the left and right brain to connect, to communicate, to kind of send signals to the body that you're safe. And then you focus on a feeling or a memory, and you don't even have to talk about it. Really, you talk about what comes up for you. So it's almost like free association. So I might go into the car park and somebody cuts me off and I just have this huge reaction, which has happened to me, by the way, because I used to get terrible road rage. And I'm like, whoa, where did that come from? Why is that affecting me so much? And I might go to my therapist and say, I'm so angry, I'm so pissed off, like what the... And so they'll say, okay, let's sit with that. And then you'll kind of go through and you'll sit with that feeling and you'll process through. And it will often come down to something a lot earlier, a lot younger, a core experience, a core wounding. Yeah, so you kind of process through it and you don't have to talk about it, which is the amazing thing.
It's interesting because I actually, I know people like that. I know people that have, just like essentially bad memory from kind of disassociating yourself from certain things to such an extent that, like you just kind of reprogrammed yourself to not remember too many things in general.
Yeah, absolutely. It's particularly adverse experiences when you're a child. That's a really primitive coping mechanism, and it's not a bad thing. It's your body's way, your brain's way of trying to keep you safe. And as we get older, we kind of become practiced in those early coping mechanisms. So, then when we're older, we might turn to things like drugs and alcohol, which are also numbing, also dissociative ways of coping. Yeah.
In terms of, okay, well, so suppose you can kind of figure something out. You're like, okay, I've traced it to the origin, right? What happens then? Because see, this is one thing that that's always puzzled me from the psychology perspective, because I'm for myself, I've done a lot of like self-analysis. Like I said, I just overanalyze everything. So anytime I feel something, like, all right, let's run it back. Let's see where that came from. And then I can figure out where it came from. And I'm like, okay, cool, I figured that out. But, what the fuck do I do about it now?
Yeah, well, so a therapy like EMDR, that's going to reprogram the memory. So it takes away the negative charge, the negative affect. Often, self-beliefs, core beliefs that have been developed from that will disappear. And then at the end of a session of EMDR, you put together a positive belief or something that you want to have gained from that. So you reprogram in that. So it actually takes out the kind of negative aspect of that event and neutralizes it in a sense. In terms of if you were just doing a talk therapy, if you were, coming to see me, I guess the goal is kind of, well, what do you want from it?
Do you think something like that could change a personality? Because I feel like a lot of these things, they affect who you are as, especially as an adult. You're like, okay, so I've developed this thing. I have, I know how to work it now. I know how to function as that person. But what happens if you like reprogram that? Does it does it change you on such a fundamental level that you become almost like a whole different person, or that?
I would say only in a positive way.
Like obviously, you've done something good, but like at the same time, I can see how that could potentially also be an issue in some areas.
Oh, absolutely. It's terrifying, right? Our bodies, our brains like the familiar. They know neurons that fire together wire together. So if you've always done something a certain way, that's where you're comfortable. And it's not, again, a bad thing. It's not a wrong thing. It's just how we are. Change is scary. Going to therapy is scary. Not knowing if you might come out being, some kind of Freudian weirdo afterwards is scary. But I think personally, the growth I've experienced from therapy and things like that has been huge and positive, and people that I know that have experienced EMDR, it's never changed kind of the core of who they are. It's just given them benefits, really, like people that have been afraid in social situations before can now go out and socialize without that fear, without that anxiety. So, some people have become more outgoing and things. So it's not a terrible thing for them. But yeah, absolutely, change is scary.
Yeah, because I'm not implying that it would be a bad thing. Obviously, from a personal perspective, it would be good. But I'm just kind of thinking more about how confusing that may be for your environment. So not for you, but for everything else around you and how they perceive you, because some people may look at you as being, you're this kind of traumatized, tough guy. But, like to some people that brings certain benefits to them. You're their, designated tough guy friend who's going to save them in certain situations because you got the muscle for it. But then suddenly you've changed and you don't want to deal with that shit no more. And now that friend of yours is just like, what do I do now? Like,
yeah, absolutely. And often people find that the hardest part of, a therapeutic journey or a healing journey or a wellness journey is the people around them. And that's why they say, the people that you hang out with, the 5 people that you spend the most time with are the most important people in your life. They are who you become. And it is really difficult. I mean, if you're in a relationship with someone and they're used to you being I was a doormat. I still kind of can be sometimes, but I was the yes girl. Yes, I'll do that. Yes, whatever it is, I'll do it for you. I'll do that. I don't think no was in my vocabulary unless it was followed with I'm so sorry. And when that changed, particularly in relationship, it was like the kickback from somebody who was so used to me always doing what they wanted, always being yes, was huge, because they were so used to this way of being and operating and the benefits that it gave them, that it was really hard for them to deal with. And ultimately, sometimes some people do separate themselves from friendships and relationships and things when they go through that journey.
See, to me, that's the more obvious area of it. Like, I mean, you're going to essentially, especially in the case of, say, if you're used to saying yes to everything and people get to the point where essentially they start abusing it, when you change that, you're going to weed out a few people. You're going to, you're probably going to lose a few friends, for your own benefit, really.
Yeah.
But what if it's the other way around? What if it's, like I said, what if it's a bit more of a, somebody relying on you to be a certain way, and now you've changed, and now that's no longer there for them. I mean, obviously, you do have to kind of think about yourself in this instance, because, this is about you. You can't kind of live your life for everyone else all the time. But at the same time, like you might come into this dilemma where on one hand, it's good for me, but I also feel bad that I'm no longer able to be that person for someone else.
I think it would come down to what that relationship meant to you and what boundaries were important to you as you were growing, as you were changing. Did you still want to be that person for those people in that relationship or whatever it was? Because if it's important to you, you make it work.
Because, assuming that you do, assuming that they actually care about it enough to kind of concern yourself with. Because if you don't, otherwise you'd be like, sorry, I've changed, too bad. I feel better now. I don't need to do whatever it is, just because you want me to. But, assuming that you do actually want to be that person that helps somebody that, plays that role in their life. And to you, it's a bit of almost like a bit of an internal conflict where it's like, well, I'm doing this for me, but at the same time, I care enough to not want to give that up for them.
Yeah, and I think if that's the case, then you absolutely don't have to. I think if that's an important aspect of who you are, you don't have to let go of that. You can be. It doesn't have to be an either or situation. It can be a both and. So you can grow and still be that person for somebody else if that's really important to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I suppose it's kind of like you've gone through a change, but then for the sake of maintaining that, you can still kind of keep that aspect in your personality and not kind of change to the extent where you give it all up and you're not that you're not the same person at all anymore for them.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Have you, in your line of work, have you kind of come into many ethical dilemmas? Because, I love to talk about ethics because I personally half the time think they're bullshit, but then I think psychology is one of those aspects where it actually isn't, there needs to be some ethics around that. So, have you had too many ethical dilemmas that you were familiar with? Not necessarily something you've gone through yet.
I think there is a really good reason for a strong ethical kind of guidelines in the practice of psychology. I personally haven't experienced kind of anything that's really challenged me. But there's absolutely, I mean, you know, in this day and age of dating apps and things like that, if someone's on a dating app, they never know who they're talking to, and you might find a psychologist comes across someone who is actually a partner of their client or something like that, and you know, where's the boundary there? Or you know, there's a best friend of a client or something, and so where is the boundary there? I mean, yeah, I haven't personally had any kind of major ethical dilemmas. But it's kind of also about your own mode of, kind of compass of, moral well-being and things there too. Because, I mean, how I conduct myself out in the world is probably different to how other people conduct themselves out in the world. Because I'm thinking, well, I can't have road rage because that person might come to me tomorrow, you know, and be needing help. But yeah, so just kind of, no, I haven't really experienced anything. There are issues out there, definitely. It's a professional world, and there's boundaries, there's professional boundaries, and upholding those and maintaining those is really important, not only for the professional's well-being, but for their clients' well-being as well.
It's interesting you said this whole thing about road rage, though, because I mean, the way I see it is, I mean, do you feel like that makes you operate in a slightly different way than most people would? Because the way I would see it, right? If I was in that place, I would have the fucking road rage, and if they did come to me the next day, I'd be like, well, it is what it is, you know. Like I'm a human as well. I'm allowed to have fucking road rage.
Yeah.
It's not that big a deal, you know. We'll get past it and then we'll get down to business. But you know, like, do you feel like that kind of affects the way you carry yourself out in the world?
I mean, it probably affects the way that I am a little bit. I've always been I was a goody two-shoes in school. I was always that little goody good. So I've always kind of been a little bit that way anyway. But also, you know, coming from a teaching background, you know, it was being aware of how I spoke or what I was talking about when I was out in public, because I could turn around and there's a student from my class behind me. So, yeah, I think it probably has a certain effect. Not so much, because at the same time, I think in this day and age, everybody's aware that we are all human. You know, it's probably, a therapist probably isn't sitting at home hiding under a rock. They do live a life. They do have probably have a partner or kids, or, you know, some sort of social life or things that they enjoy. And most people are aware of that these days. I think the main ethical kind of things that come up are more how you conduct yourself with the client in a room. Yeah. Because
to me, it's always been an interesting thing where, you know, it's a profession that I would personally find hard to kind of not always be on, you know, because like a lot of things you can just leave work at work, you know, but like when you spend all day analyzing people, I personally feel like I would go out and continue analyzing everything all the time. Yeah. Do you find that like it's easy enough to switch off, or is this like a conscious thing that you have to do?
So there's two things in that for me. I personally feel that most people that are drawn to this work have some sort of sensitivity to others, to energies, to what's created when they're with somebody else. So if that's the case, then it's learning and practicing energetic boundaries. And, you know, when you're out in public or, you know, with your friends, it's learning not to take on. But I certainly don't go around like, oh yeah, you know, he's a classic type A, or he's a this, or he's a... No, not at all. No. I mean, there's probably some people out there that do. But yeah, it's kind of like, you know, taking your shoes off or putting your shoes on when you come home or when you leave. Like, I, at the end of the day, leave. So I have like physical things that I'll do. I'll wash my hands before I leave, Or if I've finished seeing a client on Zoom, I'll go and I'll wash my hands. And that's kind of like a physical representation to me of like, that's done.
It's kind of like a doctor, you know?
Yeah. And also, you know, if you are that sensitive, or if you're talking about sharing with somebody and you're worried about taking on their stuff, you shouldn't be sitting in the room with them. You know, there's boundaries there, and that's a big thing in this kind of work is learning to have those boundaries, and it's practice. That's practice.
Yeah, so I mean, it's something that develops, because I mean, I've talked about this actually with Gita, you know, in terms of practicing law. You know, how do you relate to certain incidents? How would you feel about that? And I mean, I can imagine that, you know, like it would be easy to, even if you're not necessarily, you know, because there is somewhat of a stereotype around psychologists that they're these like almost robotic beings that will analyze you, but you know, you kind of don't deal with that. That's how you create that barrier. But you know, I personally don't think that that's true, or that's kind of, well, possible to an extent. Like, how do you live? You know, you still need to be a human. You can't just always walk around analyzing everything. So is that something that kind of comes from experience, or do you see many people potentially maybe bowing out of that work for that reason?
Absolutely. I mean, it is an experience thing. If I think about myself, in my early 20s, I was working in mental health, and I cared so much, and I just wanted to help, you know, and the stories that I would hear, would affect me. And, you know, things that I hear now still affect me, but it's also being aware of that's not my story. That's their story. And I'm able to hold. So as a practitioner, I'm here to hold you in your journey. And I'm able to hold myself separate from you. And yes, something might get created together in the room when we're talking and things naturally come out, or, you know, I might be able to relate to parts of your story or to certain emotions, and I might be emotionally affected. But as your therapist, I'm not going to sit here and burst into tears, because that's not really my job. And that's practice. You know, that's learning, and it's also doing your own work. I, you know, in my early 20s, working in mental health, had done some of my own work, but not a lot. And it's really just kind of being as whole and complete as you can in yourself, and aware if things come up for you, taking them. So we see therapists ourselves. We have to be in supervision. We have to be seeing therapists. We cannot practice without doing that.
True. Yeah. Okay, because I thought it was just like a movie thing. I thought, you know, because to me it's like, like The Sopranos comes to mind right away. You know, like Tony's therapist was seeing a therapist. I'm like, it's just like a thing where, you know, she was just overburdened by something to the extent that she needed a therapist. But so that's actually a common practice. Yeah,
it's so supervision is essential, and your supervisor is a therapist themselves. So anything that comes up in a session with a client for you, you can take to your supervisor. When you're training, you have to be doing your own therapy as well, because if you're sitting with someone and they're telling you a story, or they're going through it, recounting a traumatic experience, and you in your own life have something similar and you get really triggered, you can't be there for that person. I have to be able to be there for the person that I'm sitting with. And that's a huge honor, and with it comes a huge responsibility to also be able to take care of myself. So yeah, seeing a therapist is...
So what happens there? Like, so for example, if it's something that you can obviously relate to that extent, do you just kind of call it right there and then? It's like, oh, okay, this is going to be, well, you know, almost like a conflict of interest for myself. Like, do you have to kind of pass them on to someone, or what happens?
I would hope not. I would hope that as a professional, you had enough training and enough personal insight to know that you needed help with that. So there's obviously something there that was being stirred in you, and it's being stirred in you because there's something there that needs work on for you. So, for instance, I had a client whose father passed away when I was working with her, and my own father had just passed away like a month before. So that was really raw for me, and I found it very difficult to sit with her in her grief, but I did it. And there is a thing for me, and what our trainers will tell you, what our our lecturers will tell you, what other therapists will tell you is you can only journey with a client as deep as you're willing to journey yourself. So if I close off to that emotion myself and I'm not willing to go there, I can't carry somebody else there. I can't hold them as they go there, and it's not going to be effective processing for them. It's not going to be beneficial for them because they're just going to get a surface level, probably won't get an emotional experience at all. They'll get a head experience.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Have you ever come across someone that was, I mean, see, for me personally, I feel like if you must hit a lot of roadblocks, which must be frustrating. I feel like myself, like if I've never done any sort of therapy at all. But I feel like if I was, with the personality that I have, I would be extremely hard to work with, because I could give you undeniable logic as to why something won't work. Like I'm gonna get to the bottom of it, and like I'm gonna corner you to such an extent where I'm not doing it to be mean. I'm not doing it just to prove you wrong. But at the same time, it's just like, this is how I think.
Yeah.
I can explain this to you, like, to the absolute detail why this is happening. And in my mind, I'm like, if I could solve it, I probably would have already done that. So in coming to you, I'm just going to explain this to you one more time.
Yeah.
So, what do you do in a situation like that?
So it's different with everybody, right? And different therapists will approach it different ways. Different practitioners will approach it different ways. I would work with you probably getting you a little bit into your body and into your feelings and dropping down a little bit. Head stuff is so easy. I mean, well, it's not easy. Our heads can come up with amazing stories, right? They can come up with explanations for everything. They can recall the facts. They can do all that stuff. Dropping down into your being can be really difficult for someone like that, like dropping down into an emotional connection. And it might not necessarily be that you're purposefully stopping that. It might just be that for you, it just goes, into here, right? And that's just how you process. I can be like that sometimes myself. So it's just kind of navigating it as it comes up and sitting with the person and meeting them as they are. I cannot meet somebody I can only meet them how they come to me. So someone might not be ready to kind of drop into their body. A lot of people with trauma cannot go into their body. They can't meditate. They can't do mindfulness. It's just not safe. And a lot of people that have always been head brain, that have always been, processing through the talking, it's really hard. It's a really hard experience to try and change that. So it's just gently and it's slowly, and it can be really frustrating for both practitioner and client at times. Like, it's not easy, but yeah, you can meet it and you can work with it. Absolutely.
Interesting, because for me personally, I'm not the kind of person that would go out of my way just to corner you, just to show you that like I'm unhelpable or something like that. But I'm the kind of person that gets really down to the logic of things. So, and it's interesting you brought up, say meditation and mindfulness, because to me, I don't actually associate them too well. Like I can meditate really well. I can really kind of just focus, reset, and do all of that. Mindfulness is something that I find a lot harder because, I feel like, the explanation that I got from one of my previous guests is kind of just being more in the moment, right? So it's just kind of like, this is where I am, this is how I feel, this is kind of embracing that moment. But sometimes, for some people it's really hard, like for myself, because I think a bit wider than that. I think about past, present, and future all at once, and for me to restrict myself to just present, that's actually really that's damn near impossible. Like I feel like the only time I could do that is if I was under the influence of something, where something would feel so weird that I'm just like, okay, I'm paying a lot of attention to this right now. I'm experiencing something in a very physiological way. So yeah, like that's probably one of the only ways that I can think of.
Yeah, and it could be, I mean, there's a million reasons why that could be. It could be, you know, your autonomic nervous system might be stuck in fight or flight in one way or the other. And so you're geared to constantly go, 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 and to release off. And so you're physiologically, there's a barrier there to actually, you know, and that, again, it's not a bad thing. It's the way your body's working. And I think it's just a step-by-step process. It's a learning thing. I mean, I had to learn how to do mindfulness. I had to learn how to meditate. And I've been meditating since I was 18, and I still struggle sometimes, you know. And if I'm in the heat of a moment in something, yeah, like noticing something with my 5 senses is pretty damn hard. Like it's hard. But the more you rehearse it and the more you practice it, it becomes like a muscle. It's like going to the gym. The more you use it, the better it becomes, the more automatic it becomes. But it is a learning process.
So it's like an experience thing, I suppose. You kind of need to train yourself in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Interesting. Because see, yeah, like, I mean, one of the, as you can probably tell by now, you know, we've been talking for a little while. I'm trying to, because I know quite a lot of people like myself that, you know, like there's you have a lot of interest in psychology, you know, like because you delve into yourself, you try to understand other people to an extent as well, see where, you know, how they came to be who they are, what experiences led them to that. It allows you to kind of, I don't know, like it allows you to understand people, but at the same time, for me, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it allows me to size people up. You know, like that's just something I do right away. Like the minute somebody walks through the door, it's not the same as like being judgmental. It's not like me saying, "Ooh, he's probably this and that." It's just being very hyper aware. It's paying attention to all the little bits and pieces and the little mannerisms, and kind of establishing certain patterns from what you observe rather than from what you assume.
You know, and I would say at some point in your life you've learned how to do that, probably from a really young age, and it's probably served you in some way. So it could be not necessarily that you're in an unsafe situation, but that you learned maybe even going to school as a kid.
Oh no, I know exactly where it came from.
So it's something that we've learned to do, and again, not a bad thing. I mean, you know, you were out in the world and you're able to assess for danger. That's awesome. But it becomes a problem when you can't connect emotionally with someone, or when you cannot, or things start coming up in your life that you're going, shit, why is this happening and how do I change it? But you can't actually tap into it because you're so stuck in here. And again, a lot of people have that. It's not a bad thing. It's hypervigilance, hyper-awareness. It comes from, you know, the worlds that we've had growing up and from what we've experienced in life.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know exactly where it came from, and it's not like I don't look at those experiences as particularly traumatic. You know, I don't look at it as like, ooh, something happened to me. You know, like the way some people do around trauma. Like it wasn't something that happened to me. It was just the environment I was in, and it was normal. Everyone was in that environment. I wasn't special about it. You know, my circumstances weren't different to everyone else around me. We were all there together. But in saying that, I don't know. I always feel like, see, I'm going to be the first to admit, I feel like I've always been quite mean to psychologists anytime I've come across any.
Yeah.
Because I just start like, I start like trying to fuck with them right away.
Yeah.
I'm just like, okay, you know, you think you can analyze me? Far away. And I'm just going to poke holes in your game, you know? Like, so in that sense, like a little kid, I love it. It's a little bit like that. You kind of you get really into it, but at the same time, the further you go, the more you realize something about yourself, that it's kind of like, man, if you do need help, how are you going to be helped if you're like this? Yeah,
I'm going to say everyone can get help. Everyone can change. Everyone can grow. Look, I grew up with psychiatrists and psychotherapists. I was that person where if, I saw a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist, I did exactly the same thing. And I thought that I was like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're doing. I could pick you apart. And it doesn't, it's kind of fun.
Well, it is fun,
and it's,
yeah.
and it's kind of a fun challenge for a practitioner as well, if you find the right practitioner. So you have to find someone that's going to vibe with that and be able to work with you. And I mean, that's with any work that you do. You have to have the right person, because if you're not vibing with someone, you're just not going to go anywhere. So, challenge the person that you're working with, see how they respond. I mean, not out of badness, but absolutely, if they're able to respond and to meet you in that, that's not a bad thing.
Okay, well, I'm glad to know that, because I'm just like, I've always feel like I was just being such a dick to all the psychologists, psychiatrists that I've ever met throughout my life.
I mean, maybe a little bit, but there's nothing, I mean, it kind of comes with the job. And particularly, a lot of people have preconceived ideas that, a psychiatrist is a guy in a suit with glasses and he's just like analyzing.
Talks very monotone.
Yeah. And a psychotherapist is either, what you see like on anger management, or is someone really airy-fairy and emotional and like, goddess mother or whatever.
Yeah.
And a psychologist is somewhere in between. And so it's kind of breaking down those stereotypes as well. Like, we're human, like, I have flaws. I'm not sitting here with my glasses on, or, but everybody is, we're human too.
Yeah, because I mean, like, it's important to remember as well that, in talking like this, I'm not just kind of talking about myself right now. It's just that I personally know a lot of people that have this like predisposition, like a pretty standoffish predisposition towards any sort of therapy, even if we've got to the point where, of mental health awareness, we all know that there's problems. We all know that, like, okay, yeah, it's there. We're aware of it now. We're conscious of how we interact with each other. But, quite often, like, I mean, it's good if that's enough, but quite often it's not. No. Quite often there's, something a bit deeper than that. And, if you were to address it, it would kind of make a lot of positive changes in your life. But in saying that, when you're kind of off that mind state, you're not really going to go out of your way to do that.
Some people go their whole lives without doing it. Some people take 5 years. Some people take 15 years. It kind of comes to like a point for some people where it's like, okay, I need this. And it is hard. It's really hard to say, I need to go to therapy, or I need to talk to someone about this. I need to get some help with this. And like we were saying before, change is scary. So to imagine going to someone and maybe, making drastic changes in your life, if that's what you're imagining, is hard. It's scary. But some people will go forever without doing it, and some people will come to a point where it's like, okay, I actually need this. I really need this.
So do you think it's something that you really kind of need to come to, or because I mean, see, the way I see it, right? Just us sitting here talking right now, and I think this, this is probably the biggest takeaway that I would like people to get out of this episode is, how do you approach that? Like, how do you encourage yourself more so than anyone else? Like, I'm not talking about like encourage your mates to go get therapy. How do you approach this yourself to actually be like, okay, I have something that I could change for, in a positive way, but I'm skeptical about it, but I'm not too sure about how I'm going to do it. Like, what do you think is the best way to encourage someone to do that? If you could speak to our audience right now.
That's a really big question.
It is, yeah.
Because it comes down to your own internal motivators. What motivates you in life? For me, I got to points in my life where I could not continue the way I was going. I knew I needed help, and if I didn't get help, I probably wasn't going to wake up tomorrow. So I knew that if it didn't happen, that was it. And I think that for a few people, that's probably the same thing. For other people, it might be being out drinking with their mates, and the next morning they wake up and they don't remember, and they've spent $1,000, and they go, what the hell? Don't remember any of it. It could be a moment, an experience. I think it really comes down to, what is your motivation? You know, what do you want for your life? How do you want to experience the world? How do you want to show up in the world? How do you want people to experience you? What are you wanting to feel? What are you wanting to do with life? You know, are you okay going about how it is now? You know, if you're experiencing depression, are you okay in that space? Probably not. And it's really hard to pick up the phone and call Helpline, or to call Youthline or Lifeline or your doctor, or, you know, a local therapy clinic, and say, I need to speak to someone. But once you make that call, that first step, it's just following on the next step. It's just the little steps. You don't have to go climb Everest all in one day. It's just step, and then step, and then step. One foot in front of the other makes good walking.
Well, so I mean, yeah, like in terms of that, I mean, you kind of just skimmed over it a little bit, but, and you know, how would you make the step? You know, I think because I think one of the big things is people don't actually know how to do that. It's like, okay, cool, yeah, I think I could use some help. I think I could improve, you know, certain things about my life if I did that. I don't know how to do that, because, you know, like you hear of people doing it when something happens, when it's like, oh, well, you know, we've had this incident, maybe police were involved, maybe, you know, you get some sort of like ACC referral, whatever. I don't know how it works, but you know, like how would you advise someone to make that first step?
Yeah, so jump online, Google psychotherapists in your area. Find someone that looks like they might fit with you, or call your local clinic. Your GP often will know who's good in the area and be able to make referrals for you. Again, Lifeline, those services are really valuable, and they can make referrals as well. They can tell you who's in your area. They can help you make connections. Google is a really useful tool in that instance. If you Google, you know, ACC registered therapist, if you can get an ACC claim, and there are agencies out there like ACC will help fund therapy, WINS will help fund therapy. There are ways to help get your therapy funded if finances are a barrier. But yeah, jump online, have a Google, see who's out there, and then you just got to make the call. And you might need to make several calls. The AUT psychotherapy clinic, they're right there, and they can tell you who else is out there as well. Yeah.
In terms of, you know, because a lot of people right away think about, yeah, like you said, people start thinking about money. How big of an investment is it for someone to do that?
It really depends who you're seeing, what kind of services you're engaging with. I guess the question would be, you know, what would be the investment that you're willing to put into your life, into having your life? It is a barrier for some people. Straight up, it is a barrier. Psychotherapy in particular, psychiatrists, it's expensive. But if you go through your GP, if you get a referral, that can get funded. And like I said, ACC will treat if you've got trauma. ACC will provide funding. And WINS, if you're on the benefit of any kind, WINS will help fund therapy as well. Some workplaces have like a occupational therapy program, so they have therapists that they will send you to and they'll pay for, or they'll pay half of the fee. And some therapists out there work on a sliding scale. So they might say, what can you afford? Yeah.
Interesting. Well, obviously, I suppose it's kind of, I look at it as almost like, you know, a lawyer. a good lawyer versus just kind of someone that deals with things that aren't necessarily maybe that complicated and stuff. But, just for the dummies like myself, can you give us an explanation of the difference between, say, a psychotherapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, all the different psychs?
I mean, a lot of people don't know, right?
Yeah.
I was working last year and I'm studying my master's in psychotherapy. It's like, well, what is psychotherapy? A lot of people don't know. So a psychiatrist goes through med school and then they specialize. So a psychiatrist is, they deal with your mental health, basically. So they will give you your diagnoses. They work with the DSM, which is a diagnostic statistical manual. So they will look at things like depression, eating disorders, anxiety disorders, personality disorders, schizophrenia, all those sort of things, drug addictions. They're able to prescribe medications, and then they will often refer you to see a psychologist or a psychotherapist as well. A psychologist is kind of somewhere in between. So a psychologist, depends how they trained. If you've done clinical psychology or health psychology, basically you can practice in the room with somebody in a similar way to psychotherapy. They're probably less psychodynamic as a psychotherapist would be. And what I mean by psychodynamic is therapists look at your entire life. So from in utero, your birth, your parental relationships, your familial relationships, your experiences growing up, like I said before, social, cultural, all those things. And they will kind of paint a picture and work with the whole. Yeah.
Okay, so we got guys that kind of analyze what's going on, perhaps what kind of medication you can take. You got, then you got the people that kind of look at who does the hypnosis and whatnot.
So I think that's a really that's quite an outdated sort of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like if not that, but just something a bit more like where we're trying to dig into something.
Yeah, so a psychologist will do that with you, and a psychotherapist will do that with you. And if you see a coach like myself, I will do that with you. That's how I practice. Not a lot of people practice traditional psychotherapy anymore, which is like the Freudian kind of analysis, lying on the chair, free association sort of thing. There are some out there, and actually it's a really big school in America that they still practice like that. But yeah, it depends what they've trained in. So cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, dialectical behavior therapy, those sorts of things, it depends what a person is trained in. You might get a psychotherapist who's trained in all three of those things, and a psychologist who's only trained in cognitive behavioral therapy. So yeah, it depends on what they've trained in and how they work.
In terms of what they could teach you, right? Now, I mean, like we've talked a lot about, kind of addressing certain things. You come with a problem, you're trying to solve it. Do many people come to kind of professionals for other reasons? For example, it's something that you may not necessarily perceive as a problem. It may, it won't be like a trauma or anything, but you just like, what? I want to understand people a little bit better in some way. I want to learn how to analyze someone in some area. And that doesn't necessarily mean they want to kind of analyze the entire being, but just maybe like a certain area. Maybe it's your line of work that you're in, maybe you're some sort of a business person. You're like, I just want to understand what people in front of me are thinking a little bit better, how to read these things. Do people do that very often?
Not in my experience. I mean, I'm still relatively young in my practice and in my clinical practice in that sense. So I haven't experienced that personally. So I can't speak for others. It probably does happen, I'd imagine. There's probably people out there who do that. I would imagine that those kinds of people would also be the kinds of people who would, look up a course that they could do online or something, and, that sort of thing as well. So I don't know if they would present necessarily to therapy. They might present to a psychiatrist, maybe. I'm not sure.
Because, I remember you mentioned, like, say, NLP, for example, that I know that is something that people get into because, to them it's like, cool, neuro-linguistic programming, I can, do something, and, like in some area, like business, for example, I can make a sale that way.
Yeah.
That's actually, there's quite often it's something that's associated with that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. You will get people like that in the NLP world. And that again, personal motivation, right? What's your motivation for doing things? And a lot of those people might go and do a course, but they won't fully embody it, and they won't fully understand it, and they probably won't actually go and use it. They might go and use bits and pieces of it, and possibly not that effectively, and they might kind of drop it after a while. Some of them won't. There's probably some really highly functioning business people out there that are NLPing the shit out of people right now, but yeah.
Because, I've also heard of, a few of the personal trainers claiming certain things like that as well. It's like, I know NLP, I can talk you out of eating too much. I can talk you into exercise, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's so much more to that. There's a whole topic in and of itself. But yeah, there's yes, you could easily influence somebody, but anybody that is slightly sensitive to people, or slightly aware, or slightly switched on could easily do that. And what's your motivation for that? Like, why are you kind of wanting to do that? I think in the case of like a trainer using NLP to help someone overeat, with overeating, great. But there's probably going to be more to it than just following a script and using a script on someone. There's going to be underlying stuff. There's going to be reasons why they're not reaching their goals that actually need to be addressed as well.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I'm thinking as well. It's just like, if you're going to go down that road, you're kind of going to open such a big door that it's, it's going to be, for a personal trainer, being that I was a personal trainer for like 8 years, I feel like that's a bit above your pay grade, really.
Yeah, I personally, this is a pet peeve of mine. I have a real concern around people who do a weekend course and then practice, or who have a life experience and are then a coach. And that's why I don't like the word coach, because it doesn't accurately reflect the years and years of study and practice and supervision that I have had to go through. The only reason I'm not calling myself a psychotherapist or a therapist yet is because I haven't finished the masters, and ethically and professionally it would be wrong. You can't use that title unless you're actually registered. I have a real fear that there are people out there that have done, a 3-day course online or a week course online and think that they know what they're doing, and absolutely the intentions are great, I'm not doubting that, but there is often a lot of stuff that goes with what they're dealing with, and you're, like you say, potentially opening Pandora's box, or you're setting people up for this kind of yo-yo, right? Like, there's the whole positive psychology, like, yeah, rah, yeah, get it, girl, like, yeah, do it, you can do it, and cool. What you've essentially done is covered a shit in glitter, and you're not going to want to eat that. Like, just because it's covered in glitter and it's pretty, it's still shit. Like, so you're setting people up for this kind of yo-yo effect where they're not actually getting long-lasting, sustainable change because they haven't addressed what's actually underneath. And my fear is that a lot of people then don't go looking for help because they feel like they've tried it. They feel like, oh, I've done that, I've experienced that, and it didn't help me. Actually, there's so much more to it. And I think that there are a lot of people out there who do work with things that are outside of their depth, and it's quite dangerous.
Yeah, I can imagine it can actually put a lot of people off.
Yeah.
Seeking any kind of help. Yeah, and it's also interesting, it kind of, for some reason right away, it also makes you think of, the whole concept of toxic positivity.
Oh, yeah.
you know, where everything is just like, yeah, come on, everything is go get it, keep going. It's all this like, it's this Instagrammable kind of brand of, you know, motivational speaking. You know, everybody's a motivational speaker that's, you know, that's got anywhere in their influencing career now. That's what they do. They show up, talk some shit, and like, yeah.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, like positivity is an amazing thing, and there is something to be said with changing the way you look at things, but it has to come with the underlying stuff. Otherwise, like I said, it's just covering a turd in glitter, and it's still a turd. Like, you know, it's not real. It's not real. Life is shit sometimes, and experiences are hard, and depression, anxiety, eating disorders, mental health, invisible illness, grief, that shit is hard, and it sucks, and it's horrible to experience. And to just kind of be like, oh, you know, it's all good. What are you learning from this? Yes, absolutely. There is a lesson in pretty much everything. But until you heal it, until you feel it, until you've really dealt with it, you're just putting a little plaster over a gaping wound, you know, and it's not actually doing anything.
Yeah, no, I've seen quite a bit of that. It's just, you know, somebody always telling you to just reframe yourself into a positive frame of mind. But it's like, well, you know, have you dealt with what caused you to be negative to begin with? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I feel that. I mean, man, this has been a really interesting conversation. I mean, like, you know, I'm just sitting here like, wow, I feel like I've learned so much just now. What would be like something that you would like to put out right now? What would you, you know, as a professional in your field, what would you like people to hear from you right now? Because I personally have, you know, I feel like I've learned a lot just now. I feel like it's kind of expanded my horizon on the whole concept of addressing these things, you know. So yeah, is there anything you want to throw out there?
I'm only one person. You know, I speak from my experience, and I speak from the way I practice, and come to me in a year's time, that might be changing. So I think everything that we've talked about today is, you know, my lens. So there'll be other opinions, there'll be other ways of doing it, there'll be other people's perspectives. I think it's really important to be aware that not everybody does it the same way. And I'm human. But also just, you know, life is amazing. And when you commit to change, when you commit to healing, when you commit to actually feeling and doing the work, it's hard. It's not pretty. It's not the positive psychology all the time, but it's really, really worth it. And I have seen people come from absolute depths of not going to be able to be here tomorrow to flourishing in life and living their life and feeling fulfilled and empowered. And, you know, yeah, they still have hard days. They might still experience anxiety sometimes. They might still have old thoughts creep in at times, but they're here and they're doing it, and they're having, you know, a really fulfilling time. And I think if you have any sense of, is there something more? Then there is. And there always is, and there always will be. And I think it's really important to hold on to that and to seek help if you need it. And it's not necessarily that you have to jump in with 2 feet straight away into therapy. It might be opening up to a friend who feels safe. And then, you know, starting that process, like I said, one step in front of the other. Life is there for living, and we don't have to let who we are now or the experiences that we've had or what we think we believe about ourselves to be the final part. And there's always room for growth, and it's really exciting. Yeah. Does that sum it up?
Yeah, one time for your mind. Open your mind, get some help. And I mean, yeah, like I think that's like my biggest learning experience from this year is just, yeah, like being open to help, especially for someone that's, as hard-headed as I am, because, I always feel like I don't need no help.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah. Being open and just being aware of what's out there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I really appreciate you doing this with me today.
Well, good. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, see, it's nice to have smart people in the building.
I don't know about smart. No. Constantly learning.
Awesome. Well, yeah, no, we all really appreciate what you've done with us tonight. One time for your mind.